you're going to get the back of me. Okay, well, thanks for coming. We're going to talk, John and I are going to do a bit of a kind of two-way conversation around a bit of a head fuck. I'm going to talk a little bit around what I did with inflatables and ended up with building these AirClad structures. And then we're going to kind of mash the conversation together into the concept of what could happen if you brought the world of events to the world of architecture. So we are here predominantly, the event here is an event system, but we see a lot of potential to use what we do with these event systems to take into the world of architecture. The other day, John and I were brainstorming how we were going to talk about this, and John landed on the title, The Happiness Machine, which I can't quite remember how we got to it, but it was an idea of creating a machine for living, but instead of it being very technical, it's like, how do you just create a way of being happy, live happy, have a nice experience. And so we kind of got this idea of what could the happiness machine be. So there isn't an answer so much, but it's more of like a bit of a question. I'm going to start and run through a few bits with my journey, and then John will take over with his, and we'll head into a kind of a kind of question debate session. It could be quite heavy. I've sat and spoke to John, and I know John quite many years, and it does my head in a bit. So if you're not from the world of architecture, this could be quite a challenge. And we'll go for it. I'm going to sit down because it's so. For the people who were here yesterday, this is going to be a bit of a snapshot from yesterday, but luckily a lot of people aren't here from yesterday. What I'm going to go through is a crazy journey from an inflatable egg hoop to the belief that we could create structures that go into outer space. We've never done that, but it's a kind of belief. So I started in 1995 with a business called Inflate, straight from college, and had a passion for designing plastic products, homewares and stuff like that. And I bought a machine to make inflatable products in my warehouse and started designing and making anything inflatable that I could think of, and also morphed into making all sorts of over time, other plastic products. This this idea took off and kind of became a business. We were successful enough to be exhibiting and selling throughout the world. And with that, we also came along and got involved in all sorts of other projects for other brands and started designing anything from furniture, costumes, jackets. Downstairs, you'll see Louis Vuitton jackets we've worked on. We've done crazy photo shoot stuff and all sorts of things. Worked on seating projects. And in that journey, as we were going around the world doing trade shows, it became apparent that even though this is actually now a heavy structure, we were taking at the time lots of MDF constructions to build trade stands. And one day we kind of thought, actually, why are we taking all of these heavy wooden things around the world to do shows? And thought, well, let's make an inflatable structure. So we built this one in Monaco as a concept pop-up store in 1999 or something, and could really see immediately that by getting rid of all the solid structure and creating these lightweight structures, people were really intrigued by it. People were not threatened and curious, and they were touching it and squeezing it and all these things, which I don't know how many of you walk up to a concrete building and squeeze it and touch it. I do touch concrete buildings, but I don't think many people go up and hug them. But when you make an inflatable building, people hug it. So it was interesting. I thought that was kind of a good concept. So we were still doing the trade shows. We gradually realized that instead of actually trying to sell the products, let's just create more experiential moments. So we started to this was a trade show we did in New York, and instead of taking the whole product range to sell it like everybody else was doing, we just took 1-2 products and a pod. And basically what happened was customers were coming up and they were curious to what we could do. They would buy the products if they had a store to sell, but they were also intrigued in this notion of these experiential spaces in a trade show. From that, we had a lot of interest from brands were seeing what we were doing at shows, and gradually we were commissioned to make, design and produce pop-up inflatable shows for other people to greater or lesser success. You know, when you design for a client, you've got a very fixed brief to work with, so you do the best you can with it. You're trying to push them out of their comfort zone, but it was always fun to create these really bold graphic structures. So very quickly I realized that selling lots of small products or selling one structure, it made a lot more sense to focus on the structure. So we morphed from the small products into exhibition stand designers. So I was never ever wanted to be an exhibition designer, but we kind of morphed into it. So alongside that, realized it's really hard to see these. Alongside that, being product designers, realized that whilst you're designing trade stands, whilst we're designing the trade stands, we could see there was an opportunity to create products as exhibition spaces. So we created our own off-the-shelf products that people could buy. So alongside doing the commissions, we went from creating the small gift products into the more sort of structural pop-up products. And this opened up more and more opportunities. Like this show here, they rented 50 pods. And the cost to rent these, they set the show up 2 days quicker. So they actually made a capex of £65,000 profit in using our product in this show compared to what it would have taken to traditionally have built all the booths out. So we, the whole side of this business took off, and we literally went fully immersed in the world of pop-up exhibition stands. And then the natural progression from that, we got asked to do structures outside. And so basically we took the same product philosophy into larger scale structures. So if we went from the small ones to the big ones. I will say the growing pains of going from a lightweight indoor structure to a massive outdoor structure in bright white in a muddy field meant that we did kill a lot of buildings, because actually dealing with the environment's weather and other things was a massive exercise in how to preserve the quality of the structures. But we really enjoyed the kind of, again, bringing this design product identity to the world of outdoor exhibition events. And so over the, through the 2000s, we developed our identity for creating inflatable structures around the world, for exhibitions, for pop-up museums. This is in New York, a pop-up exhibition stand in Times Square. Over in Denmark, we had standard domes available and stuff like that. And this was in Sochi. This is a 2,600 square meter structure for Volkswagen in Sochi. So we could see the scale opportunity with the inflatables. But what was happening in parallel with that is you could see that the clients and the brands we were working with wanted to come closer to architecture for events. And this is where the next big pivot for us came, is identifying that there was a need to create a product that was more architectural and not just a canopy. So the inflate stuff was cool, but the problem was when you go inside, you have no structure to work with. So basically you had to go in and build truss in and put everything else inside. So it was, the inflatables are fun and they're a bit, they're kind of alive and they have some motion to them. But obviously you then had to go in and build truss in to create the space. So we could see that there was a product on the horizon that could deliver a architectural event space. So we carried on, with that notion and carried on with the events and the projects we were doing. This was the World Poker Tour in Wembley. And we start to do some sort of semi-architectural inflate stuff. So there's been like kind of morphing of where things could go. And we could see also with the inflatables, the business was really about scale. So this is a 40-meter dome on at Chatsworth House, and you could see that the whole thing was about getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But the finessing of the events world was being lost. We were just going into scale, big, 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 rather than drilling into this potential of high-end premium event spaces. And so by chance, in around 2007, we got involved in a project to develop some cladding for container hotels in the Middle East. And the first idea on the left, we took the idea of just getting the containers and cladding them with inflatable tubes around it that slid into like a CADA system. And that was well received, but eventually the project developed and it became a series of square panels on the building. And we got the sign off on the job and we were ready to go into production. And then the 2008, what do we call it, credit crunch, or the collapse in the globe? Financial crisis happened and the project went. And so in true entrepreneurial style, I took the concept of what we'd done. We'd called the project AirClad as a working title internally. So I took the name AirClad and I thought, right, okay, let's turn our attention to developing products with this idea of creating like temporary structures or extensions. So I built this structure as a test piece to prove the idea of what we could do with the hotel project. And bear in mind, at this point, I hadn't made the connection between events. I was thinking purely, because we were doing this for the hotel, I was purely thinking, this needs to be a building, it needs to be a building. So it was that, we started with that. And then we made a concept piece, another test piece that we put on the studio of our office, on the roof of our studio office in London, where the main train line goes into Liverpool Street. And we put a banner with our telephone number, because I think it was still telephone numbers in those days. Maybe there was email. It's definitely telephone numbers. And I got a call from someone who saw it and said he had a pizza restaurant and he wanted to take away his umbrellas and build a extension to his pizza restaurant with no planning. He just wanted to build it. And we built this for him. It's like 10 by 5 meters, like an extension to his pizza restaurant. And it was really successful. He basically inverted his business. So in winter, everybody wanted to be inside and no one wanted to be outside. But when he put this there, everybody wanted to be outside and no one wanted to be inside. And so we thought, we are going to become millionaires. We're going to turn every umbrella in the world into an AirClad. And then everybody is going to invert their business and have an outside space that they can use. And then we never sold any more. So that was the start and end of that. And then, to show how clever I am, I still didn't see the idea of doing event systems, but eventually Puma had seen the Alvolo project and came to us and said, we think that you could build an alternative to a container for our exhibition. And so Puma basically commissioned us to take the idea, the AirClad idea, and make them a AirClad with a roof terrace. So it's nothing like going from a concept all the way to a double height structure, but we did it. We did this, and that's when the penny dropped. We were like, this is that premium event architecture system that all the customers have been asking for, that we didn't know what it was. So that's when we realized that AirClad was destined to become this architecture system. And so from the Puma job, we kind of sat down and went, right, okay, if this is going to become a system, let's start to think of it as a system. And this was the follow-on project where we tried to rationalize the design and blah, blah, blah. And we built this, and when we was on site, on the first day, there was a pallet, and I wasn't sure what the pallet was, a massive pallet, and it turned out that it was 6,000 nuts and bolts to put this structure together. And I knew quite quickly that that was never going to be a scalable business in the world of events. And so on the plane on the way back from Australia, where that was built, literally sat there and redesigned the whole system to get rid of all of the nuts and bolts. So we basically created the AirClad system that we have now, which is a 2-part click-together system with the click-in cross braces. So everything between the fascias on a single height structure, has no nuts and bolts at all. It all just slots together. And that then brought us into the world of events. So I will skip through this because it just shows the system that we have, which is we have a classic range of products in this world, which is 6 meter structures, 10 meters. You'll notice all the brands we work with are premium, high-end brands or recognized brands mainly. This project, we have this picture, and this is on a rooftop in London. The system is designed and engineered not to need any foundations in most applications, and this has been set up permanently on a roof terrace. It's engineered and verified to just sit there. We have the 4s and the 8s, so it's like systems. This is the one we saw is now the 4 meter high system. You see the experience inside. We don't do any interior. That's all of our partners are the experts in bringing the spaces to life. We have experts here. Jason is here. There might be, you're the only expert in the room I can see. I can see Tim somewhere. Tim's here. Oh, he's hiding under the hat. You had an AirClad hat on. I was like, who's that with there? Respect. This is one of Jason's projects as well. So this is a double height version with Michelin. And then this is in Finland, so you can start to see how the space can be built out. And the structure you're in now is this one that's come back home with the mezzanine floor, full branding, comes with a flying boat. It's outside, it's somewhere outside. It's funny, the cost of that boat compared to the structure is like a lifetime apart. And then a couple of years ago, we pushed it even further by the whole systems we have are modular and scalable, but they're always scalable in depth. And then a couple of years ago, we did a project where we scaled the system sideways to prove that we could build side on side. And so now this project allowed us to see the engineering around how we could scale the system much bigger in all dimensions, single and double height, split mezzanines and stuff like that. So this structure here, we're starting to become more and more, in my words, structurally architectural in the frame of what it is. And we have the trailer version you see outside, which is very popular. And then that was the one you saw before, the X deck. And then you can see we have the combination of the double height and the terrace. So the whole event system, from that notion of Puma, has developed along. We have the small micro products, the Yummy and the kiosks. So that's our sort of event world. And alongside that has been this aching interest that goes back to, I forgot to say with the picture of the roof terrace, that's where John and I first started to discuss the world of...
Well, we shared a studio. I had my architecture practice there, Nick had his interior design business, not interior, product design business there, and we collaborated on various things over the years, and yeah, that was one of the first things we did, wasn't it?
We looked at that, how it could be. There's a lot of learning curves with that. It was just a concept. But more recently, we started to really think about this idea of what could events and architecture do if they come together. And really coming from the Suffolk pod, this idea of like, where does it sit and how can it be? What is it? Which we'll discuss later. And some of the work we've been doing, and John's been sharing design ideas, looking at how we live, how houses are constructed, how we modulate them, how we create all of the components to be transportable in and off site, to be reused, how communities might exist and stuff like that. So it's quite conceptual. But there's been a number of projects that come along the side that some go further, some not. A project we were looking at in Hoxton where this pushed along. I don't know if it goes the full distance, but looking at how AirClad could become a kind of live-work space on a temporary site. It's only allowed to be used for 15 years. So can this go up for 15 years and be used, come down, go to another site, split up? Because the thing with it, they can all split and go off in multiple components. So lots of questions. Yeah, I mean, when you start taking it mentally more seriously, you start going, we have people that even questioning airports, pop-up airports. This is a live project that was running for a while in Dubai for temporary offices on the airport there. We have a number of partners that are very keen on the notion of AirClad, what it could do in the world of medical. And we have done a lot of work and engineering to verify to planning consent smaller pop-up workspaces for industrial sites. So this also generated some data and other things, but it's all still quite conceptual. And I like to put this in because whilst we try to be quite, in a way, with it, there's a degree of practicality to it. I like the fact that we can still just build stuff like this. We could literally build one of these, which I kind of like to keep there. And this is what we at AirClad are kind of put under our umbrella of fast architecture, which is, as I've learned recently, the world of architecture moves glacial, and it's kind of scary. If you're an event person and you come across the world of architecture, it's you couldn't imagine the difference in process. And we are, I mentioned it earlier, we're kind of really about trying to bring space to life and life to space. That's what we work on with our events business. But we think that in the architectural world, we can do a similar journey, maybe quicker, maybe challenging how we do it, because we can move in, do stuff, move out, change it, etc., etc. And we've kind of, just left these in here as a brand for the AirClad brand. We're also really starting to look at how we immerse ourselves in beyond just the events world, but also sponsoring surf events recently, because we're trying to think about how we challenge ourselves and connect ourselves to activities that we believe in, about like not just being online all the time, but reality of how we live and how we do stuff. And sorry, I'm just going to slip through. So this is where we're sort of looking at sort of like human moments where events or activities happen and bringing communities together. And recently, the guys are here from Zest. Well, last summer, we did a fantastic project with them, or their project was fantastic, and we supplied an AirClad structure to create pop-up community centres that were travelling around Lincoln, which they might say more about later, which was where we're getting really excited about how we're pulling our knowledge and technologies to help do many other things that aren't just events, but they're places to create moments for things to happen that are engaging and good for the community as well, but good because we're not just trying to kind of make good in the kind of inverted brackets, but actually make spaces that people genuinely feel, yes, I'm happy to be here. Sorry, that's me. Just on this bit. I tried to do it quite quickly, so I hope that was okay.
Thanks, Nick. So yeah, Nick sort of, I'm going to stand up if that's all right.
Yeah.
Normally people say stand up. Like, I am standing up. This is how tall I am. So Nick sort of explained that we collaborate together. I architect by training, but actually I've been in property development for the last 12 years. So I'm probably looking at this now thinking how to make this work. Because architects, how many people here are actually architects? So you've got a few? Okay. So the thing is that there's some things...
I was cheating.
There's
wannabe.
And is anybody here from the property development world? Excellent. Okay, good. So the thing is that architects have been fascinated by this stuff for ages, and I think the happiness machine was a kind of a play on Le Corbusier's, the home is a machine for living in, and but it was pretty joyless. And I think that actually, what could we do, and what's Nick doing? And one of the things that Nick's been doing is, and he says it's always difficult. Every time somebody wants to buy one, he's saying, well, you can rent it. And every time they want to rent one, they try and buy it. So it's kind of never quite get it right. But there's something that's happening with what Nick's doing with AirClad is building a set of components that are out there in the world, traveling around doing things, coming together, forming buildings, then going off and reshaping and reforming somewhere else. And in a way, it's a very rapid version of what I see the circular economy being in the built environment. If we're going to build buildings that we can reuse, or have components that we need to reuse, then we need to think about something called interoperability. So how do the interfaces work? It's fine, each individual member, but actually how they talk to each other and how they work is a really critical thing. And Nick has sort of been solving this for himself. He described it right from the beginning, all of those bolts, get rid of that. I don't need all of those bolts. What we need is common ways of things connecting together. And that got me thinking. So in a way, this is going to, this is sort of going to go into maybe a future world that is accommodating of Nick's world, but with more, could have more materials in it, could have more processes in it. It's not all having to be AirClad, sorry, but this is a framework
what?
for thinking what it could be like.
Fuck my business.
And we at the end, this was actually the end of our conversation the other day, where we said, how do you, because what we were thinking is if people are going to be, the whole affordability of land and living and all those sorts of things, which we're going to get into in a minute, it's become so inaccessible to many people, and rent is seen as sort of second rate. In a way, a lot of rental money goes into sort of property investors, etc. And in a way, what we're saying is, well, maybe that's a world that exists and we can't really change that. But what we could do is create something in parallel, where in a way, this idea that those who live in brick houses shouldn't pay rent. And that will come, that will make sense later. It's almost like those who live in things which are property, which are glued together, their rent just goes into a property sort of land value system, which is just making everything more unaffordable. And actually, if Nick's created this beautiful system that effectively can be rented and used and reused, if we lived within something that was more like that, what could that look like? So a little bit of boring perhaps, but I think it's interesting. We've got land. We need land in order to live. We need buildings and space within which we're going to do things in. But ultimately, when we join them together, we glue those things together. We glue buildings to land, and it creates property. And what we have is a situation where property is generally going up in value. Most of the time, most property is going up in value. And you could say, well, is the property going up in value? But really, is the land the thing that's really going up in value? Because there comes a point where the land is worth so much, you may as well demolish the building that's on it and build a new building. So in a way, the buildings, the things that sit on the land, in comparison to the value of the land and the value of the property, actually is very low. If you built a new house and then decided the next day you didn't want it, you'd have to pay somebody to take it away. It has no value. The materials have virtually no value. You'd be lucky if somebody would take it away. They might take the Miele cooker and all the appliances away, but they'll trash the kitchen, they'll throw it in the skip. There's no point. Right? So we've got this issue where land's going up, property's going up, but actually the material value of what we're investing in is going down. And as long as we've got that, we've got a linear economy where all of that material is going to waste. And in Nick's world, effectively, that's not happening. And I found that really interesting. In Nick's world, the value of the building, the value of the asset, this component, is going up. So what could that mean for architecture? What could that mean for property? What could that mean for living in a more equitable way? So business as usual, there's four main components that make up the way in which we, create property. We have land, which we've spoken about, finance, professional services, designers, products, people make, construction industry, the supply side, and people who live in it, owners, occupiers, people who want to rent things or buy things. And in a way, those four components are pretty consistent. I think that this side of the world, there's lots of great people in here. They've known for a long time different ways in which we could live on this planet. The system doesn't allow it. The system is not set up to sort of do what Nick's talking about in the built environment within the property industry as it exists. Because what sits in the middle of this, and I'm one of them, so I feel I can sort of say this, is your developer, your house builder, who sort of sits in the middle of this web. And effectively, they promote secure land, using their own equity. So yeah, they're pulling some skin in the game. They're getting hold of land. As Mark Twain said, get into land, they're not making any more of it. It's a very rarefied thing, and so therefore they control a lot of the land. And what they then do is they employ professional services and construction services to then deliver that building onto that land to create that property proposition. In order to do that, they need to borrow money, from either private equity or from life funds, depending on the nature of their business and what the nature of the investment is, which they need to borrow and need to pay it back. And ultimately, the way they pay that back, so the ultimate customer is this person who's actually for a long time in the process had very little to do with all of this, right? And they basically sell or rent the product to this customer who's using either their own equity, money they've saved for a deposit, but usually their wages or mortgage, to pay back the developer, the house builder, who can then pay back the finance. And that is basically the model in which we live in, unless anybody disagrees at this point. I'm looking at the people and I said he's into property, he's a property developer here, and I think that's generally the sort of way it works, okay? And that's what's known as residual land value, because actually in reality it's supposed to work the other way around. Is you're supposed to figure out how much is it going to cost, what do they want, how much is it going to cost to deliver that, what do I need to do that, what's the cost of borrowing, and therefore how much can I pay for land. That's the residual land value model. How much can I afford to pay for land? But that's not happening. Is people are paying way too much for land up here, way too much for land. So what actually happens is, I think that's wrong. So they overpay for land. This title's wrong. And then what they're usually looking to do then is to make the viability equation in development work, is they're looking to lower these costs, the cost of professional services, products, construction. So the thing that Nick's trying to do in terms of create something that's got longevity, long life, has got lots of intelligence built into it, not interested in that, because this person has got no interest. Once they've sold the building, it's gone. It's not their building. They don't need it to be intelligent. They just need it to be cheap, right? So the quality of this is going down because we're overpaying here. And then they still need to pay this back because they need to borrow money to make this work, to pay for the land. And that usually requires this person to pay 20 to 40% profit on top of any of that costs. So the costs of this whole process, and yes, they have put some money into that process and they deserve to make a profit, but they're being asked to then pay a 20 to 40% profit on top of the entire cost of this entire process, not just on the equity that this person puts into. So this is the way it sort of sits. And in a way, there's only really, well, there are losers, because as an architect, ex-architect, the reason I got out of architecture is these people lose quite a lot, but really the real loser, in my opinion, is the consumer, is the person at the end of the process, because what they're doing is overpaying for something which is usually not very good, and it's only going to get worse. So actually, I don't think we've got a residual land value model. I think we've got an inflated land value model. And I think we've got to find a way to actually try and solve that problem. So this was another word that Nick and I came up with, was this idea, can you untether that land and building issue? Can you have land, time, space equals prosperity? So no longer is it land plus buildings equals property. It's can land with space, untethered, create a more prosperous future for the people who might live in it. And so, in a way, create a system where land maybe doesn't go up with the property market. It's locked at a social value, or it's locked and tracks with inflation. The space, as Nick's described, his infrastructure that he's created here, that's got circular reuse value. So the next time it's deployed and every time it's employed, you're starting to get into sort of zero carbon impact, because the carbon has been spent the first time it's been used. So it's increasingly more environmentally friendly to keep reusing this system and bring new materials into that ecosystem and just grow it. And in a way create something which is more affordable, more equitable, because effectively you might not be purchasing this thing in the first place. It's a rental model which can flow through. And in this one, effectively what you start to do is have purpose-led finance rather than just finance, looking at things like land trusts, which locks the value of land rather than just putting land into the market. So we're about to probably release the biggest release of Greenbelt we're going to have, since we built new towns. How's that land going to go into the market? If the government put all that land into the existing market, it's just going to go up and be gone, whereas actually they could put it in as in a land trust, so therefore it stays affordable in perpetuity. What we need to add into this world of construction is actually assembly and maintenance. So it's no longer just build it and walk away. It's actually we're putting components together and we're actually providing you with long-term maintenance contracts, and actually moving away from ownership and into occupiers and communities of these structures. And in this world, there's no reason why, way into the future perhaps, that these groups of people or these individuals could rent the land and pay a charge to be there and rent a solution from a company like AirClad that's delivering a home and live very happily in something which there's no capital cost, there's just a rental cost which they can cover with their wage. They're not looking at putting any of their equity into it, and it could be an incredibly socially driven, environmentally friendly solution. What would happen in this world, instead of this financing the developer to make lots of money, which they obviously get paid back with their profit margins that they're looking for, they can start to finance the delivery of high quality services and products. So this creates this rental income. This is really steady income in perpetuity, perfect for things like life funds who are looking, they don't want their money back quickly, they want their money back slowly over time with a really good level of consistent growth. And in a way, there's no reason why they can't also secure and hold land in trust. So yes, this could be local authority land put into trust, but I think there's an argument that for a purpose-led fund who's trying to deliver what's called ESG, environmental and social and governance gains, there isn't an argument for them to buy land and hold it in trust, because by doing that they can do everything else which would create more affordable housing and a more sustainable property landscape. And there's no, again, within that, so to transition to that, I think then there comes a need for what I call purpose-led developers and operators to exist. So actually half my life I spend, although the company name at the start here it was Neighbourhood, which is my kind of think tank. I spent half my life as the creative director for a company called Igloo Regeneration. And I would argue that we were set up by Aviva, by a pension fund, to deliver environmentally friendly and socially responsible development, because everybody ticked that box on their pension fund and they wanted to know how they could go about doing it, and there wasn't a solution out there, so they created Igloo. So we've always we've always been in that purpose-led space, and actually we were one of the first B Corps in the UK, and we were the second property B Corps in Europe.
I just turned the fan off.
Thank you.
The sun's down.
Who needs fans?
Sun's down now.
So within that purpose-led model, there could be a role for the developer still, but really what they're doing is taking development management fees from the finance. They're delivering estates management to the owners and occupiers, to the occupiers and communities of the buildings. They can be managing the way land comes into the trust. They can be managing the procurement of these services on behalf of the finance, because these guys don't have the expertise. These guys have relied upon these guys to know what they're doing, and most of the time what they're doing is making shitloads of money. Right? What they need to do is move to a place where they're purpose-driven and actually delivering benefits to their customers, and I think this is one of the models we can do it. And in this model, where this person doesn't want to be faced with 3 different things to spend, effectively what you can then do, and this actually says wrapper, is create a wrapper around this offer where effectively a part of their subscription or whatever it is they pay, Nick doesn't like the word rent so I won't use it, some of it goes back to the people who delivered the service, some of it goes back into the land trust to pay for the maintenance and the stewardship of that, and part of it goes into the operational model in order to provide the services that they might want. In a community-led development, you wouldn't need this person. So I call that, I think when we sort of started to talk about it, we were sort of saying, well, maybe, we did have Maslow, didn't we, as a diagram. Is a lot of the time we're spending on that very low level, on that, if people know Maslow's pyramid, you've got your physiological need, have you got a roof over your head? And then you've got safe and secure, can you afford it? And actually, for a lot of people who live in the UK, they don't even have safe and secure housing. And I think one of the things that we're really passionate about is there an idea within what Nick's doing here that actually could disrupt that situation where people can actually have a physiological, can have a roof over their head, it can be safe and secure because it's affordable and equitable. It can actually create great communities and give people a sense of value, because I think Nick's always sort of said, whatever it is, it's got to be cool. It's got to be something that people want, rather than, oh, this is the best I could afford. And ultimately, I think the top of Maslow's pyramid is self-actualization, which I think is happiness. So for us, I think we sort of said, right, it's not a machine for living in anymore, it's a machine for making people happy. And so therefore, I guess our proposition today is, do we think that actually somewhere in all of these ramblings, there's there's a kernel of an idea about how we together could create a happiness machine for living in the 21st century. So that's the proposition. And I guess I just wanted to put in a few images of them projects that Neighbourhood and Igloo have done in this space, thinking about what that might mean. And I guess what's the architecture of circularity? What is a more circular, reusable architecture going to look like? So this was actually a reuse project. It's Soviet 1960s housing blocks in Tallinn. So a way in which we could reuse the structure that already exists and then reapply outdoor space. We actually extended them in CLT to make the spaces slightly bigger and create balconies and living. And one of the big things for me is water. You know, water's such a valuable resource, and we flush most of it away. We try and hide it and don't live with it. And actually, how can we hold and use that within our buildings? And it's this whole component-led. So the whole thing that you see with Nick's exploded drawings, architects love them as well. If we can turn them into components and they go into a system and they're interoperable and they're of the same size. I lived in Japan for a while. You know, the Japanese for hundreds of years have been building standardized buildings. You know, the tatami mat sets the size of the timbers, sets the height of the timbers. All of it's pre-thought through, and they don't necessarily reuse it because in a way their culture isn't one of reuse, but actually they're starting to change. It's quite interesting if anybody spends time in Japan, and creating these sort of happier places. And then this is an Igloo project, this is the CGI, but this is the building finish, where instead of pulling floors of office space into an existing structure, actually could we put this structure inside the structure? So therefore it's low carbon, it's in timber, all the components are exposed, all the bolts are exposed, you can take it apart, you can move it, you can extend it, you can add something to it. So again, starting to think about, we might not have a circular economy now, but if we don't start pulling building materials into the world that can actually be accessed, they are future material banks effectively, then we won't ever be able to get there. So we need to start thinking, how do we design our buildings now so that actually we can access those resources in the future, because we won't have these resources in the future. This was a project that looked at park homes and the park home ecology that's around Hull, and could we actually create a desirable product out of existing technologies that already exist? And this was how that could manifest. And then this was the Liverpool townhouse, which we were second in, which again, you can start to see some of the hallmarks. Can we have quite clean, simple, usually in timber, CLT living spaces in here, but then these frameworks that go onto the outside, because the world's changed so often. Everybody seems to forget in a house that you've got, you know, bins, bikes, air source heat pumps, solar, water containers, all of the things that actually we need to incorporate into buildings. Everybody's designed like a house like we used to 100 years ago, then trying to cram all this stuff in. Whereas actually, are we better to create frameworks which enable us to have a level of adaptability on them? You know, because again, it's getting hotter out there and wetter, so we need to capture water, but we also need to shade ourselves as well. And we've not been very good at shading our buildings in the UK in particular. So yeah, and then this was the Homes of 2030, which was a government-led competition. We're now building 16 of these up in Sunderland as part of a housing expo, with a lot of these ideas that I've been speaking about, not necessarily around the land, but around the way the buildings are designed and the low carbon and designed for demountability, more, and yeah. So I think on that note, I'll probably finish, because I could just keep rattling on more. So I thought at this point we could sort of open it out and to the floor to quiz us, tell us we're mad, don't understand, talking shit. I don't mind. So we like, really. Well, you might want to come back on that.
No, I think first of all, John said everything I would have said as well if I was. Couldn't have put it better myself. All that intellect is great. I just think we've just built houses that move around, but it's much more basic. No, I don't know. It's just like we said. This is quite a kind of. This is like, you know, when you have a chat in a pub and you kind of put the worlds to right. This is what we end up doing every time we get together. Is like, right, how can we actually make a dent in this problem? How can we actually unleash something to basically potentially solve some kind of social issues with the technology? And the issues are created. In my mind, I always think that, like, if you're going to design something, I always think I could never design something that I wouldn't live in myself. So even if we're going to do like a social housing project, It has to be a project I'd live in. Why would you design something that you don't like? So I always start, like John said, I always think that's where we should start. And actually by creating products, you just have to get it brilliant once and then you just make more of it, which I think is kind of the starting point. But I think the exciting bit for me in a sick way is I love the commercial nightmare behind it. I think that's where the creativity is really going to come from, because I think the challenges of all of the kind of ownership and financing and pensions and all of the other bits, I think they're going to push, if we can keep a hold of it, I think there will be a creative object that comes from it that satisfies that. That's what excites me, but I've got no idea what it is. And I spoke yesterday about like kind of projects that encourage the opportunity of chance. And this for me is like, I genuinely, whilst I've always been like that we did a little sketch of the house, and I always said at the start, I didn't want us to draw anything because basically it would kind of create this ident that you think it should be. But I kind of really feel with this that something will emerge that kind of defines it, and it will become a classic form follows function, form follows the nightmare of the problem we're solving. So there's no answer here, but there's a genuine excitement, I think.